Hello and welcome to Law and Democracy, a podcast of the election law program at The Ohio State University. I am Steve Huefner, the Deputy Director of our election law program, and today on our episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Ned Foley, the Director of our election law program, and Tony Gaughan and Terry Enns, Senior Fellows in the election law program. Today, we're going to talk briefly about an upcoming event here at the OSU College of Law. It is the Symposium event organized by the Ohio State Law Journal. And every year, our Ohio State Law Journal has some sort of symposium event to address a pertinent contemporary legal topic. This year, the symposium will be addressing some election law issues. And it's just another in a long line of events that over many years since the inception of our election law program, we in the program have had the opportunity to participate in partnership with other dimensions of the law school or the university community, bringing in experts from around the country to talk about key issues. This symposium issue is dedicated to talking about a particular book. And Tony, why don't you sort of cue up for us a little bit about what this symposium is?
Absolutely, Steve. So our keynote speaker on February 21 at the Moritz College of Law in Columbus will be Nick Stephanopoulos, an election law expert and professor of law at Harvard Law School. Nick is one of the most distinguished election law scholars in the country, and he has a forthcoming book on aligning election law. And so our topic, the topic that we'll be focused on all day, will be on different elements of election law that are currently misaligned and what steps can be taken to align them with current realities in election law.
And this is a project that Nick has been working on for a number of years now, and thinking about how a number of dimensions of the way in which we have structured our electoral mechanics, electoral processes, often produce results that are not aligned with the general sentiments of the majority of Americans, to put it simply. And in the symposium, I know we'll have the opportunity to talk about a number of different ways in which that critique of our existing institutions might be brought to bear across different dimensions of our electoral mechanics. But it does seem to me that this is a particularly fruitful time to be thinking about the idea of alignment, or how to get our electoral institutions to function in such a way that the outputs they produce are more aligned with the American electorate, with the American public, with the citizens of our democracy, and that there are certain ways that we might each be able to point to as examples of misalignments in our processes at the moment. But we have a number of other election law scholars from around the country coming to this symposium event. Again, this is February 21st, so it's coming up just in a couple of weeks. And between now and that event, we'll have a few additional episodes of our podcast in which we will provide a bit of a taste of what the symposium might involve by inviting a couple of those panelists to join us for brief episodes of our podcast. Ned, I know that you have already devoted quite a bit of thought to Nick's book, and I'm wondering if you'd like to just share a little bit of some of your reflections on the contribution that his book is already making and might continue to make.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thank Tony and Terry. I'm really super excited by both the existence of this book, which, as Steve said, has been some years in the making, and the fact that Ohio State is hosting this symposium to discuss it, because I think this is a really, really important major contribution to the field of election law. You know, I've been fortunate to teach election law to students for 30 plus years now. And one of the challenges, frankly, for teachers in this field, I felt, and curious if you felt, is is there an overarching theme to election law that unifies all of the different subtopics. Election law encompasses a wide variety of subtopics all about elections, but there's redistricting, there's campaign finance, there's the how candidates get on the ballot. There's, the rules about voter registration and the casting and counting of votes and recounts. And I have felt prior to Nick's book that our field as a whole has been searching for a unifying theory. Sometimes I joke it's like physicists trying to find the unifying theory of the universe, and they've managed to unite several forces, but gravity can't just get united in with the rest of them. And I think Nick's book really, for me, more than any other, promises and offers the possibility of a unifying theory around this concept of alignment, that the goal of election law is, as Tony and Steve have said, to align outputs with inputs so that the results of elections match what the voters want. And when you think about it, it is, in some sense, it's a simple concept, but some of the best concepts that scientists and scholars have invented or discovered throughout human history have been those ones that, wow, the light bulb goes off and you go, why didn't I think of that? That just seems so obvious, but it wasn't really ever expressed until somebody had the insight to express what now seems obvious. And I'll be interested to see whether or not Nick's book kind of has that receptivity, because to see if others feel that this concept of alignment and misalignment is really the measurement by which we should judge all election laws. Do they contribute to alignment, or do they contribute to misalignment? So that's in particular why I'm super excited that the book now exists, and we have the opportunity at Ohio State to host this symposium on it.
One of the dimensions of the book, I know, is that it is, making the argument that this is a unifying way to think about what is the right approach to a number of these issues within the field of election law. But that in addition to that, you can find implicit uses of this theory in some of the jurisprudence around election law, even though it may not have ever been expressly articulated in quite the same way. And that leads me to also wonder about two quite different potential uses of alignment theory. And one is just as a baseline way of measuring or thinking about the strength and robustness and health of a particular area of election law. Is it functioning in a way that produces greater alignment? But a different use of an alignment theory would be as a judicial doctrine, a way in which courts themselves might approach challenges that have been brought to election law issues. And those are different but related uses. And I expect that we'll have opportunity at the symposium to be talking about both of them. But what are others of you anticipating on that score?
Well, just speak quickly for myself. I'm glad, Steve, you mentioned that distinction, because I'm definitely 100% on board for the first use, meaning that it's kind of an intellectual tool or for all of us as citizens to evaluate the health of our electoral system. And I think, whether it's starting today or in future podcasts, we'll want to evaluate what is going on right now in American democracy. And is it a consequence of misalignment? And, is that the problem that we need to diagnose and need to fix, or something else? So I think the alignment concept is a crucial concept, but that is different from judges using it as a rule of law or a principle of law that's embedded already within our legal system for adjudicating cases. And just personally, I'm less persuaded by Nick's work and the book in particular that it pulls off that second claim. I think the book is incredibly valuable, resting on the first use of the concept. People can either agree with the second use or not, but I don't think the value of this work rises or falls on whether it's an accurate account of the state of judicial precedent on election law and what judges themselves should do.
And it strikes me that it's so timely in light of not just the most recent events, but the broader populist era that we're living in that extends beyond the United States. We're seeing a populist moment everywhere from New Zealand to Argentina to Germany. And it all reflects, I think, at a certain level, whether it's populism coming from the left or from the right, a sense that the system of law and government that prevails in any given country is misaligned with the wishes of the electorate. And certainly here in the United States, we're experiencing that in an extremely intense way and have for the last decade. And election law, I think in the United States, has been a particular point of contention in this populist moment. So I do think that Nick's book is extremely timely and potentially has lessons beyond the field of election law and speaks more broadly to how reform can help address this sense of disconnect between what the people want and how the government is structured.
So how about describing a few of the other folks that are going to come and react to the book? It seems like you've opened a nice door to say, okay, there's the intellectual, the shaping side of it, there's the jurisprudential side of it. So who all is going to come and chit chat?
Yeah, so we've got a really impressive lineup. And, I can just quickly run through the list for us and for our listeners. The panelists are, as I mentioned earlier, coming from really sort of across the nation and representing a variety of approaches to election law, but they include, in no particular order, Chris Warshaw, Rick Pildes, Josh Sellers, our own Ned Foley, Ned, Miriam Seifter, Michael Kang, Jacob Eisler, and our own Tony Gaughan, along with Nick Stephanopoulos, who will be here with us for the entire symposium and will be delivering a keynote address as part of this day-long event. So that's a great lineup, and I can't wait to have that firepower all together in one room, if you will. So that's what we're looking forward to.
And I suppose I should disclose that, in addition to the enthusiasm that I've expressed, I've used this alignment concept in some of my own scholarship that's already been published and other scholarship that's on the way, including a paper for this symposium. Nick's book is an outgrowth, as Steve mentioned, from work that Nick did, starting with a law review article, I think in the Columbia Law Review some number of years ago now. And I, grabbed onto that concept, back then and I've seen it evolve in Nick's future work. But, to give you get a mini taste of how the alignment concept I've found it to be useful, and that does relate to current events, is people who listen to this podcast may know that my work on electoral system reform has argued that we need to change the way we do elections in order to produce outcomes that better track or mirror, more congruent with what the voters want by the inputs they express through the electoral process. And that's another way of, that's just different terminology for the same alignment concept. So, I've written pieces pointing out that, frankly, Trump's electoral victory last fall, even though he, beat Kamala Harris fair and square in terms of the ballots cast, was the product of an overall electoral system that misaligned voters' preferences with outcomes, and that an electoral system that was more in alignment would have resulted in a different outcome, because the way the primaries interact with the general election meant that a candidate, someone like Nikki Haley, who was more aligned with the totality of the voters, got boxed out of the electoral process through the structures that we employ. So if you just want to think very simplistically, what would life be different in America if our electoral system, followed the alignment principle? I can't help but think absolutely, because whatever you think about the beginning of President Trump's second term, it's incredibly consequential. That's what's happened in the first couple of weeks. And yet, and again, it's perfectly legitimate and legal from the perspective of the rules that we have. I don't want to cast any doubt on it in that respect. But if it is the product of a system that produces misalignment, there still is a sort of artificiality to what we're living through compared to what perhaps we should be living through if we had had a more aligned electoral system. And you can make that point with respect to Senate elections and House of Representative elections and so forth. So this idea is not just intellectual and theoretical. There's a real practical element to thinking whether or not this concept makes sense for understanding the moment that America and American democracy is in right now.
And Ned, I think it was explicit in the way you just described things, but I want to just clarify and extend or make it quite clear that when you talk about how outcomes could be different if we were using a more aligned system, for particularly for how we conduct our elections, by outcomes could be different, you're not saying that the outcomes would be the other candidate that lost under the system we had. You're saying we'd have different candidates or a larger set of candidates, and that the American electorate would be able to align with some of those other candidates more completely or more satisfactorily than with the candidates, the system we currently have.
Yeah, absolutely. If we had, again, just thinking about the presidential election process, if we, and we could devote another podcast episode to drilling down into this in more detail if it's worthwhile, but if we had an electoral system that was more in alignment according to principles that I think both Nick and I share, you would induce other candidates into the race at the beginning of the process. So if we think of the presidential election year beginning in early January, or even before, when the candidates announce that they're running and starting to raise money and so forth, the mix of candidates would definitely include some of the same players. No doubt that Trump would have run under any system. Joe Biden initially would have run under any system and then probably would have dropped out at some point under any system to be replaced by his running mate. Other candidates like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie, if you remember all the people who were kind of in the mix on the Republican side at the beginning, they likely would have been in there. But it's possible that other Democrats would have been in the mix as well, because they wouldn't have been directly threatening then President Biden from running in a more open system. So you might have had, a younger generation of Democrats, not just Kamala Harris, but Gretchen Whitmer and others, taking a stab at the process earlier on. And so we can't know for sure how that would shake out, but we can make some educated guesses, knowing that, we've got pockets of voters who are enthusiastic supporters of Trump and who would have supported Trump under any system. We've got progressive Democrats, more on the left side, who would want to see their values in a candidate, whether it's somebody like AOC specifically or Bernie Sanders, or they feel comfortable with another Democrat. There's a pocket of Democrats who aren't quite as progressive as the ones I just mentioned. And there's pockets of Republicans who aren't as MAGA or Trump-oriented as Trump himself. And how all of those different preferences would have shaken out into a result, would have been very different, I think we can say, under a different electoral system than the system that we have today.
And then I want to also just reiterate something that was also explicit in our podcast earlier today, which is that Nick's alignment theory has application in a whole range of contexts, not just this context that we've just been talking about, which concerns voting and perhaps the role of political parties, but the alignment concept could be brought to bear, as we said earlier, on things like redistricting or campaign finance regulation, and a number of other dimensions of election law. So we hope people will join us at the symposium and see this variety of applications and engage in thinking critically about the potential here. I know we're going to wrap up our episode for today in just a moment. I want to just say that rather than giving you a URL where you can go on the web to find more information about the symposium and to register for it, it's easier to just invite you to Google the Ohio State Law Journal Symposium. And that will take you to a place where you can register for this event, which is again, February 21st at the Ohio State Moritz College of Law. So with that, let me see if Terry or Tony or Ned want to say a final word for today, and then invite everyone to recognize we'll be coming back with a few other pieces to tease people in advance of the symposium.
One thing I would point out to any viewers who live in the Columbus area, the symposium will actually be held in Saxby Auditorium, which is on the main floor of Drinko Hall, which is the home to the Moritz College of Law. You can't miss it when you walk in the main doors of the law school.
So until our next episode, thank you for joining us on Law and Democracy.